I'm going to show you something that starts out with this sound. Here we go. This sound is composed entirely of sine waves, as is technically any sound. Now, granted, there's going to be some degeneration in a natural sound typically, which I kind of tried to supply here in sort of different, complications of the waveforms, tremolo, and detuning them slightly and staggering them alongside. But still, the main components are sine waves. And it is a fact, of course, that in nature, any periodic sound, any sound with a tone, that is, in other words, any sound with a tone, any periodic sound, is going to be the resultant of a base fundamental frequency and oscillations occurring at concurrent integer multiples of that fundamental frequency. So 1 times it, 2 times it, 3 times it, 4 times it, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, 10 times, 11 times, and on. Notably, in that harmonic oscillation, complex harmonic oscillation, you'll find that the more consonant or sonorous elements of that sound to extract will occur at frequencies that are essentially doublings or powers thereof. You'll also find less so beyond that. The frequencies that are any multiples of 2 and a number relative to one another are also going to have some sort of consonants. In other words, if you look here, granted I have the note names of these sine waves instead of the frequency names, but know that this starting note is C6, which is 1050 hertz, at least I have designated right here. Sounds somewhat faint, right? Because it's one sine wave. It's a bit clipped at the beginning, I know. Anyway. We also have this one. C5, 525 hertz. Notice how they mesh into one another and become just one sound, with the lower frequency predominating as the fundamental frequency, the frequency we perceive as the pitch. I'm going to play next. Down here, where you have frequency multiples, or integer multiples, of that starting fundamental frequency, which was C6. Not C5, C6. I have it starting very high, don't I? And for now, we'll have 2 octaves, and it'll sound like C5. That's a C5. And 8 minutes 40 seconds already, God. Okay, so if I take out the C5, keep the C6 and C7, you'll still hear C6 now. A little ping added to it, which you probably don't recognize because it's so high and you haven't heard the raw sine wave on its own in a while. Let me just play the raw sine wave again. Duller sound. Twinklier sound. Let's add another sine wave in. Notice the tremolo here. This one has a little sort of wave correlating with it. That's tremolo. The amplitude is changing rapidly, which creates a sympathetic vibration underneath. C8. This is 2100 hertz. No, wait, sorry, my bad. C7 is 2100 hertz. G7 will be 3150 hertz. C8 will be 4200 hertz. You notice it's the sound like C6 because I have that playing alongside the G7, C7, and C6. What happens if I take out the C6 for a moment? You'll find this happens. Probably still is perceptible to you as a C6, although it's weakened, because those harmonic frequencies vibrate at a concurrent average rate that your brain processes the fundamental of 1050 hertz, C6. Let's add a few more in. This is E8. Notice the tremolo on that too. G8 now added to that as well. This has more husk to it now, huh? B flat 8. This is 7 times the harmonic frequency, the fundamental frequency, which does lead to some sort of level of, you know, a sort of harmonic disharmony. It's not disharmonious, or it's not non-harmonic for sure, but is a bit less harmonically astute or harmonically simple. That's the word, simple, because the frequency itself is at an odd ratio with the fundamental, even though it is a direct multiple of it. Now it has that twang. Noticeable twang occurs with that 7th harmonic, more or less. Let's take it out again. Let's add it back in. Very subtle difference. And here, C9. That is 8400 hertz. You can barely hear that on its own. Let me take out the twang, the twangy one, the 7. And let me take out the third, which is the E8, the 5th, 5 times the frequency. Kind of duller now, right? We add them back in. Now, let's revert back to the full sound I had. All tracks. Let's hear it. It's going to sound like this. Now that frequency, that tone, let's hear it again. You might notice it's not C. No, this tone vibrates at F3 or F4, depending on how you hear it. I hear it as F4. And that would make sense because F4 is the dominant frequency in there. It's the loudest one. But you'll notice also, it has all my harmonics of C6 going on. Here we go, right here. Now look above, you see F2, G flat 2, A flat 2. It's not like it's, silence. It's there. It's there. And it's B flat 2, C3, D3, F3, A flat 3, C4, F4, C5, C6. So I want to actually do this here. Call an audible, I'll do that. I want to mute all these again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with here. F2. Should be fairly audible, but a bit muffled or faint. That's one harmonic at a very low frequency, or one sine wave at a very low frequency. F2 is basically, as far as frequency, F2 is, let me think, well, if C6 is 1050 hertz, C5, let's do the math, C5 is 525 hertz. Let's hear them together. Those sound pretty distinct from each other. because the amplitude. They harmonize well, but they can be heard distinctly as separate tones. F4. Okay. Well, here I have to tell you what you probably can suss out. Some of you, at least. At F4, something is different happening. Something different is happening. At F4, I have started to subdivide the frequency at integer divisors. Rather than multiply at integer multiples, divide it at integer divisors. C5 is simply 1/2 of the root. F4, oh, that is 1/3 the root. That means that F2 is 1/4 of 1/3 of the root. Yes. In other words, 1/12 of the root. Because 4 times 3 is 12. Now you still hear the C5. But you also hear the F2 underneath. And then, here we go. And then, let's add in here some of the latter, whatever I've devised here. 3/4 of the fundamental, you can see it faintly is written there. 3/4 of the fundamental. C4. And C4 is middle C, and that'll be approximately 262 hertz. Okay? Now, at this present moment, you haven't heard any pure, indisputable undertones, as I'm trying to allude to here. You've only heard harmonics at a somewhat odd distribution. First one being an octave and a half above the fundamental. That's present at least. F2. Or alternatively, you've heard perhaps a missing fundamental at F3 with an undertone at F2, and then these going on to produce that missing fundamental at F3. Right. If I play that missing fundamental at F3, you'll hear a very robust tone, I imagine. Yeah, that's very pronounced. Now, right now, I don't have any harmonics from C6 happening. In fact, I don't have C6 happening. Let me turn it back in. Now it's happening there. C6 generates doesn't generate. It is the inspiring or starting note, groundwork note, or skywork note to allow for all these frequencies underneath to blossom and to be devised. Again, the undertone series doesn't happen beyond specialized situations in nature. It doesn't occur on its own because a resonator cannot produce a tone that exceeds in wavelength its own size or dimensions. In other words, you can't have a guitar sound like a cello or a viola. Not going to happen. Likewise, you can't have a soprano sound like a bass, generally speaking. You'd have to have very specialized testosterone injections. You'd have to have some sort of like technique to have the chest voice blossom over time. Sequentially, probably get tenor at most, probably as a soprano. Anyway, what we have here is, again, this panoply of frequencies that I've come to devise together. And I just want to make sure that something is correct here. Audacity kind of looks like so low-key is the thing. It's very powerful. I can offset something here. It's going to sound the same, but I just don't like how that happened. I have to not worry about it seems. Because I don't know how to zoom in. I'm a bit rusty with this program. Okay, so yeah, so let's hear it again. Now, presently, we don't have any harmonics beyond, or subharmonics beyond, also as undertones, beyond the notes that are actually harmonics of the fundamental. We have F3, which is 262 hertz, or sorry, is, no. C4 is 262 hertz, which is 3/4 the fundamental. Then we have F3, which is 1/2 of the fundamental. So we do some math quickly. 3/4 of the fundamental. If 3/4 is 262.5, then 1/2, or 1/3 rather, of 262.5 is going to be, bear with me, 87 and about 2/3 or whatnot. And, or 87.5, let's say. Yeah, 87.5. 87.5 hertz is going to be half of the F3 here, which then thus is 175 hertz. Yes. And then we have more complex ones here. Now you might see that they have 3/5 of fundamental, 3/7, 3/8, and then sometimes it becomes 3/9 or 1/3, 3/10, 3/11, 3/12 or 1/4. These are relative to the fundamental I've counted now, because I've kind of engaged with this concept for a while. But really, these are what can be described as the fundamental being 1/3 of the fundamental frequency. Okay. 1/4 of the fundamental frequency. 3 times 1/4 is 3/4. 1/5. 1/6. Because 3 times 1/6 is 3/6 or 1/2. 3/7. 3/8. 3/9 or 1/3. Or sorry. Well, now you hear it. So 1/7 or 3/7 of the fundamental. 1/8 of the root of 3/8 of the fundamental. 1/9 of the root or 1/3 of the fundamental. Also is 3/9. 1/10 of the root or 3/10 of the fundamental. 1/11 of the root or 3/11 of the fundamental. And 1/12 of the root or 1/4 of the fundamental. Also is 3/12 of the fundamental. Now, do you want to hear it again? Let's hear it. Let's add this one in, 3/5. Also is 1/5 of the fundamental. That's going to be our one subharmonic that's distinctly a subharmonic, unequivocally a subharmonic. This will form what you'll hear as, well, you won't hear it actually, you'll just experience it. It forms essentially what is a minor triad as a harmonic array. And by harmonic, I mean really partials. Harmonic would not be accurate to use here because it's not going by harmonic proportions, but instead the inversion of harmonic proportions, also known as subharmonics. So subharmonic array, yielding a minor sonority, but in the same manner that a natural harmonic series would elicit. I'm just going to solo that for a moment, which will take away all of these. Even what I could do is I can make that very loud. I don't have to solo it. So 9 decibels. I'll make it 10 decibels above 0. You'll hear it ring. Boom. Hear that? Notice that it doesn't sound discordant. It sounds dark. It sounds brooding. But it doesn't sound discordant. It'll be even louder. Hear that? Let's make it 9 again. It all works together. I'll take out the C6 also because there's a lot of C happening right now, right? Still works. Got another C. This is F3 as sine waves. I want to note also why I used sine waves here. They are the elemental unit of sound, essentially, periodic sound. But also, a sine wave lacks harmonics. And so none of these sounds I've used to additively synthesize a new sound carries anything to conflict in terms of its timbre, in terms of frequency content, with any of these subharmonics. If they were not sine waves, it'd be a much complexer sound. And it would still work because you can play minor with harmonic tones, of course. It's been done for as long as we know music. But if we subtract the harmonic conflict that happens, it becomes a pure minor sound that hasn't to worry about that inner conflict that occurs in its sonority. Let's even add this, which is ostensibly a half diminished seventh chord. Well, it is a half diminished seventh chord as a subharmony, but ultimately you would think it wouldn't sound easygoing because it's a diminished chord. It has a tritone built in. At the root, it's a diminished fifth. It's going to sound a bit nutty, you would think. But look. Is that nutty to you? Not to me. Watch, I'll even raise this up a bit. I'll raise the roof with this a bit. Bring it to 0 from negative 18. Same treatment. Does that sound nutty to you? No. Louder. You can still sense it's the F, although the D does ring out in a way down there. Because again, with a subharmonic, which again is not natural, but it's in something like you could say preternatural or something, the lowest tones function much like fundamentals robbed of their power. Because they're all hearkening toward this one frequency that is above them. That is the beckon, that is the dominant frequency to guide their proportions. Without that, frequency doesn't exist in the way. But still produces resonance toward that frequency. I'm curious to see what happens if I take out one of the Fs. Does it weaken? It does weaken. But it still sounds consonant at the very least. Again, this is with a diminished seventh chord, a half diminished seventh chord at the bottom. Let's take out another F. Let's see if we lose any sense of the F being a reference. Yeah, it doesn't sound dissonant to me. To me, at least, and I'm one person, but you can tell me about it. Let's add the back in. Again, also, I should note that D3 is still very loud. So let me make it even less loud. We'll bring it back to where it was. It's negative 18. Now, interestingly enough, I hear the root is taking precedence, which is there still. The root is there still. And that root has no fifths happening above it. Okay? Only notes concordant with the fifth below it, or i.e. its fourth, which is F. Again. Now it does also sound like an A flat in some way, because A flat, of course, is forming a major third underneath that root. So there is that still. And again, there are harmonic frequencies that are basically being turned on their head in the subharmonic series. That's what it is. That's what it constitutes. So if you do that, certain notes can become sort of secondary roots, like a fundamental, like a new fundamental or stand-in. But you have the starting, root note, and/or namely the fundamental that arises an octave and a fifth below it. With that, you have a much more formidable and complete sound. Let's add back in those Fs. Now you can barely discern any of the subharmonics. Let's add even all of these in back. And this one is actually, we can stop here. Let's do one below. That's 3/10. This 3/11, which sounds very stark. You can see you can describe it from the ratio alone, which is two prime numbers that are far apart. Relatively prime and absolutely prime. And that actually produces a G flat 2 underneath the all of this. And it produces a minor ninth, or minor second, relative to the nearest F involved in this series. Okay? Major 7 down from, and the nearest F above. Minor second up from the nearest F below. That's very discordant. Watch. But you don't hear it that way. I'll even raise it up a bit, this frequency, this G flat 2. Does that sound discordant to you? It's made even more prominent. Might sound a bit like bellowing and sort of intense, but it doesn't sound harsh or chaotic or askew. There's no disorder here. It's simply dark. Yeah, that's a G flat 2. Okay. It sounds very discordant on its own relative to F. But here, now you hear it a bit. But really, you shouldn't have a problem with that. This one is an F2 that completes the descent from C6 to F2. It's 3.5 octaves. And that is, that's an F2. And, that note is 2 whole octaves below what we perceive as our fundamental, which is F4. F4, again, is 100 and... No. Sorry. Right. Oh my. F4. So a calculator handy. It's going to be 1/3 of 1050, so it's going to be 350 hertz. Yes, okay, there we go. That means F3 is half of that 175 hertz. And F2 is half of that, which is 87.5 hertz. Let's look at it. Now you hear it's sort of got a choral effect, or sort of it's a mixture of sounds, but it's still unified. And these are sine waves, no harmonics. Let's add in harmonics. That's the C7 from earlier, way earlier. It's the G7. Let's add that. Now the root is more pronounced. Let's add this C8, E8. Now it's twangy. It's a bit more pinched sounding, more bold. Sparkles more. G8, that validates the G7, which validates in turn the C6. Okay. Twinkly. Let's have a see if it raises a bit in sound and amplitude. Just a tad. Little twangier. And then C9. You can barely hear, thankfully. C6 doubling, as I have here. So add some color to that C6 even more, will strengthen that root. And this, I kind of add a little bit of a spice here. This is F5. That's double 1/3 of the frequency. That is the root. So it's double of C6's fundamental in the subharmonic series, which is F4. In other words, 2/3 the frequency C of 1050 hertz, C6. Thus 700 hertz here. Now that sounds quite like F5. Like F4, sorry. Alright. Everything's going on around it. Loads of minor key type vibration. It's an A flat 2. I'll add some more minor color because that's the minor third to F. I'm going to subdue some of that C6 action, or C action. Okay. Let's do this one too. Because we don't need it. We don't need it as much. Good. You can see, good. It adds to it for sure. We don't need it nearly as much as the rest. Can't do much with that. Notable enough, also B flat is here, B flat 8, and B flat is 4th to F. It doesn't sound like a root in of itself. No, granted, it's really high up, but you don't hear anything that's suggesting anything other than F as the root when all of this is going on. So C is a bit muted now. You still hear it ring. It is the root after all. But F takes precedence as naming the note. Well, I still have this here. Let me lessen the blow of this C6 even more. But it is what it is. I'm going to try to force a truth onto this. And let's try to make this even louder. It's a bit synthetic, this F5. But it still fits the series. Still fits the mechanics of the series, at least. Yeah. Okay. And this here. Nice. And the rest here is just doubling of the whole mix, as well as reverberation. Doubling, reverberation. Doubling, reverberation. Doubling, reverberation. They're staggered a bit also, which allows it to sound a bit more natural and like it's happening in a chaotic world rather than in a computer. So let's hear it. Good. I'm going to actually concede that it sounds a bit more synthesized there. But anyway, because of the chorus effect that happens. Let me make it subtler. I'm going to make it all together a little less loud. Well, that sounds better to me. I also had this happening. There was a melody I'd composed, a very brief one, very brief, 3 notes. That had they repeat. It has this exact set of sine waves as a whole tone, and the tones I put. There's a slightly different timbre here because I adjusted a bit here before after I made this melody. This melody here is also different from what I actually sent a friend. I'm not sure what the melody is. It's 3 notes, though. Let's hear it. Seems like the melody is an E flat chord with a bit of a major 7th happening in it also, because that root happens. And then also A flat and C minor, which could honestly sound like an A flat sonority. It also sounds like an E flat sonority. This was the softened resolution down by a 4th, because A flat is the 4th of E flat. Da, da, da. But it sounds pretty decidedly like C minor to me as a result here. And it doesn't sound discordant. It's the same as the sine waves. Okay. It doesn't sound discordant. It sounds intense, maybe even a bit tense, but it doesn't sound discordant. In fact, that first sonority there sounds rather serene to me. I'm gonna sing over that a bit, actually. Notice some of those intervals I sing are harmonic intervals, explicitly harmonic intervals. And some are contextualizable as either harmonic or subharmonic intervals. And some are just subharmonic intervals. They all work over this harmonic palette because, well, it's using consonant, harmonic or subharmonic content for each tone and allowing us to plaster melody along it. The fundamental feel of the tone itself on its own, one tone at a time, or one isolated tone, is going to be different from a harmonic tone. But it still works in the context of being a blank canvas. Just one maybe with, a tanner look, or a tanned look, raised. And the other one being kind of a bright, gleaming, fresh, nice, white. Eggshell versus tan. That's basically it. Clouds and clarity. Clarity and clouds. That's all it is. And, yeah. So again, here's the tone on its own. In fact, I'll even play one of these things here. And the mix is below. So you can hear what I had initially. I think that's it, yeah. Notice how subtle that is. You don't even recognize it as minor necessarily, or minor tinged. It just sounds darkened. To you, it's a consonant sound. One consonant sound, one unitary consonant sound. So you assume it has harmonic content. And it does from the root, but not from the fundamental, from the tone you hear as the pitch. Yeah. That root you hear also, but it sounds supportive to the fundamental, to me at least. Anyway, here's the full thing again. Kind of like an orchestra stab, but one note. Let's even speed up the rate of how it plays. Now you hear the tone, kind of like a bell even. And a bell is interesting because a bell has undertones that it's tuned to. That's why it sounds like that sort of a gloomy and, onerous, ominous sound. That's why. See 2.5. Whatever. 3. Notice we had covered a change in frequency that I'm not going to talk into right now. I think it's actually similar to what we were talking about earlier. Interesting. Right, that's a C. That's a C because 1.5, or rather 3 times the initial frequency of F4, then twice the frequency would be F5, as we heard the first, that bell thing I mentioned. 2.5 would be, right, that would be an A. That's why it sounded like an A. I was a bit doubtful. Yeah, because that's the 5th harmonic of F, because a major third is the 5th harmonic of any harmonic sequence. And then we have C5, or C6 right here. Oh, that's, sorry, hold on. That's C6. So we go below. See what happens if we do 1/2. Oops, that's, I keep pressing the wrong button. Okay. And it still sounds like one sound. It just has a different subharmonic content versus harmonic content in the sound baked in. And these are sine waves, like I said. This one should sound like B flat. A little sharp, but yes, B flat. This should sound like F, even lower. It's 0.25 times the speed. This has some infrasound baked in because the subharmonics are so low at this point. And there's tremolo going on too. And this is 1/5. Can I get 1/5? Okay, almost 1/5. That will be a D flat. Sounds more like A to me. Interesting. Because the fundamental is so low in the spectrum at this point, it's hard to make it out, especially with the root being so prominent. That's why. Again, subharmonics, at this point, we should know that subharmonics have a root and a fundamental. Harmonics have a fundamental and a dominant, or root and a dominant. The root and the fundamental are the same in the harmonic series. It has a dominant. In the 5th, that's the reinforcing note. A subharmonic series, however, has a root which reinforces, or supplies, even, we'll say supplies, the fundamental, which is an octave and a 5th below. The fundamental doesn't reinforce the root because it's the 4th from the root, at least as far as octave equivalency goes. It's related more to the 4th of the root than it is to the 5th. And so that does not reinforce the root. It takes from the root and supplies itself. And each note in the subharmonic series kind of does that as well, to lesser degrees than the fundamental. Still contributing in turn by collectively existing as the as in ratio to that fundamental, thus producing a spectrum that is referencing, hearkening toward that fundamental, rather than sounding destructive or noisy, or, it sounds coherent, consonant even. Let's see, it's a 1. So yeah, here's the sound again. Here it is an octave higher, just so you hear that again. Bell tone, more or less. And listen closely to a bell, by the way, anytime you hear a bell. You'll probably hear different notes inside. They don't sound disjunct from the overall tone of the bell, but they are there and they create that sort of, haunted sound. That's why a bell tolls so ominously. And it's composed entirely of that sonority, that tone, being placed on top of itself into chords. And lastly, I'll show you a similar melody I had with in the morning. That was basically what starts out on a C, but primarily it's E flat, A flat, C. It's very similar, but it's gonna sound different in how it's phrased melodically, harmonically, even though the notes themselves are subharmonic. Do I have it? Do we have it? Do we have it? If we don't, it's not a big deal. Let me just check. Here we go. Oh, wait. Yeah. Hey, Scott. Good morning. Happy daylight savings. I want you to tell me, what key do you think this is in? Additive synthesis for each and every note. I synthesized each of these notes. Well, it's the same timbre, but we're working with. You tell me what this is. And I want you to keep in mind before I go that that melody simply spells out in unison. It's not harmonized beyond the sinusoid harmonics of the tones themselves. It is simply put a simple. It's not plugged in my piano. It's a simple A flat major chord. Do 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 do. Wait, sorry. There we go. This if I sing it, to me it sounds like A flat major. It doesn't sound like anything else. I'll play it on the piano here. If I punctuate the C, it doesn't really cause much deviation from hearing it as A flat because it's an A flat major chord. It's the most prominent way to put it, way to think of it. But yet, if I play it here, sounds very dark, grim, gloomy, much like minor, and so your mind goes to thinking of it as C minor more so, even though there's no fifth other than baked into the sound, the tone. There's no fifth melodically to support it. We just hear that, and as a result, we don't hear it as an A flat. with that sort of timbre. It's very interesting to notice. So I think that's all I wanted to say. This is supposed to be much shorter for Instagram, but it's, I don't know. It's a whole lecture, I guess. So this is probably on my YouTube. And, yeah, am I done? Any last words? It's really late. And, I have to make sure I take care of myself. It's later than I would even think it is because daylight saving time just started. So, oh well, yeah. Let's hear it one more time. I'm probably a bit spaced out. 1 second. I'll show you one more thing actually after this too. That's an F note. That's not a chord. That's one pointed out on Reddit. Chords are based on such things. I'm gonna show you this too. Because I was having fun with it. Of course, MuseScore is funny. So wait, hold on. Yeah, there always that was something new. I want you to hear this and notice how the harmony is in fact functional. So in the general sense of the word, not just strict classical rigors. It does have a classical effect, but listen for this and hear how it meshes together as a very subharmony inflected piece. Yeah, there's a lot of dominant harmony going on in there too, as well as plagal harmony. But I don't know which one more so. Probably dominant harmony. It is a classical piece, a choral arrangement, of course. But you heard some stuff going on that is basically very much subharmony oriented. So just wanted to show you that. Thank you. Have a good night. I gotta sleep. All right. Bis bald.